Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. I am so incredibly excited you're here today because, well, we're exploring a topic that is secretly pulling the strings in literally every school, university, and even corporate training room around the globe. We're unpacking the totally fascinating hidden psychology of classroom design. We're going to look at the hard data behind how the physical space around us directly, and I mean directly, manipulates our focus, our behavior, and our ability to absorb new information.
So I want to start off by asking you a question. Does it really matter where you sit? Think back to your own days in school. When the teacher handed out that dreaded seating chart, did you roll your eyes? I know I did. Most of us just grew up assuming seating arrangements were an administrative afterthought or, maybe just a way to punish the chatty kids. But as you'll see in the research we're diving into today, the physical layout of a room is actually one of the absolute most powerful, active tools an educator has for shaping your brain's performance. It's a real game changer.
Okay, let's quickly dive into our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the power of a seat, then the assigned seating advantage. Third, designing for executive function. Fourth, rows, clusters, or horseshoes. And finally, active learning classroom design.
Section 1. The power of a seat. The hidden dynamics of a single desk.
Okay, so there's this popular feel-good myth out there that letting students just pick their own seats makes them happier and more focused. Sounds nice, right? Well, brace yourselves for this statistic. A landmark 2012 study showed that letting students select their own seats actually triples disruptive behavior compared to when a teacher strategically assigns them. Yep, 3 times the off-task chatting and lost time. Why? Because, surprise, surprise, students almost always congregate with their friends. But, it gets even more granular than that. A brand new 2024 study proves that inattention is quite literally contagious. It spreads like wildfire. If you're sitting next to a conspicuously bored, slouching, or distracted classmate, it actively hurts your brain's ability to learn. Researchers found that students sitting next to an off-task peer wrote half as many pages of notes. And the kicker? When tested later, their quiz scores dropped by a full 9 points. So, yeah, your neighbor's lack of focus directly drains your own academic performance. No way around it.
Section 2. The assigned seating advantage. Orchestrating social dynamics.
So if free seating is basically a recipe for distraction, how can educators flip the script? The answer is using the seating chart to purposefully foster pro-social behavior. And honestly, this is one of the most uplifting findings we have for you today. A 2021 study revealed that strategically assigned seating boosts cross-demographic new friendships by 50%. 50%! When teachers mix up the room, students end up making friends with peers they might otherwise have just completely brushed off. It breaks down social barriers across gender, class, and ethnic backgrounds. And researchers note these attitude shifts have lasting, lifelong consequences. Who knew a simple desk assignment was actually a profound networking and empathy tool, right?
Section 3. Designing for executive function. Protecting working memory.
Shifting our focus to the cognitive side of things for a second, the physical environment physically taxes our executive function. Check this out. A 2016 study found that environmental distractions, we're talking visual clutter on the walls, noise from the hallway, or high traffic areas right by the door, account for a massive 25% of all off-task behavior. Think about that for a second. A quarter of all lost instructional time is just the room itself being too loud or too busy. Suppressing all that extra noise takes serious cognitive effort. It drains a student's working memory and leaves way fewer mental resources for the actual lesson. And this hits younger students and those who already struggle with attention the absolute hardest. But don't worry, there are incredibly practical fixes for this. If a student struggles with attention, simply seating them near the front and away from high traffic spots instantly frees up their cognitive load. For students struggling with self-control, placing them near visual anchor charts that display classroom rules helps remind them of expectations without a teacher having to say a single word. And one of the best tools? Creating a dedicated common corner right in the room. This is a designated space with sensory tools and deep breathing exercises where students can take a quick brain break and practice regulating their emotions in a healthy, completely normalized way.
Section 4. Rows, clusters, or horseshoes. The geometry of learning.
All right, now that we've optimized the individual seat, let's zoom out a bit. How you group the desks entirely dictates how students interact. It's like a giant puzzle. Let's rapidly contrast our 2 most common setups. Traditional rows, highly effective for direct instruction. Research shows rows yield the absolute lowest rates of off-task behavior. But, and it's a big but, they have a major flaw. They leave the kids in the back of the room totally stranded, unable to read the body language of their peers.
On the flip side, we have clusters of 4 to 6 desks. These are fantastic for brainstorming and peer review, but, you guessed it, they inherently carry a much higher risk of distraction.
So, the absolutely crucial point here is that the lesson type must dictate the layout. If you want a whole class discussion, the data heavily favors the horseshoe shape, basically an upside-down U. This layout offers incredibly high engagement access because it maintains fantastic visual lines of sight. Every single student can see the teacher, and just as importantly, they can see each other's faces. If your room never changes shape, you're essentially sending a message that learning is static and predictable.
Section 5. Active Learning Classroom Design, the Modern Learning Space.
Which brings us to the purposeful architecture of the modern learning space. These spaces are intentionally built to completely eradicate the front of the classroom. And the numbers behind these active learning classrooms are just astounding. Researcher Peter Barrett found that the physical characteristics of a flexible classroom can account for a 16% boost in academic outcomes. 16%! And when you introduce kinesthetic seating, things like wobble chairs or standing desks, on-task behavior spikes to an incredible 89%. Just allowing students to wiggle or stand gives them a sense of autonomy that dramatically improves their focus.
But here is where it gets absolutely fascinating. Let's look at a very specific study from Texas State University published in 2021. They had the exact same experienced instructor teach the exact same curriculum in 2 different active learning classrooms. On one hand, we have a room equipped with mobile desks, so individual chairs with tiny attached tables on wheels. On the other, a room with mobile tables, large square tables that seat multiple students together. So what happens when you give students these 2 different types of flexible furniture?
Well, the instructor's experience was wildly different between the 2 rooms. Look at this exasperated quote regarding the mobile desks. She said, "As soon as they go in, they move themselves in rows. You can hear a pin drop. I'd be like, come on, y'all, put your phones up, talk." Crazy, right? Because the desks looked kind of like traditional furniture, the students stubbornly wheeled their fancy, flexible furniture right back into isolated, traditional rows, and they just checked out on their phones.
Now contrast that with the mobile tables. Because the tables were large and shared, the students couldn't physically pull away from one another. The instructor noted, with the tables, they're forced to stay like that. They have to work together. They're looking at somebody's face. The furniture literally physically overrode their desire to isolate and forced them right into an interactive, collaborative community.
And the hard data absolutely backed up the instructor's gut feeling. Researchers used a rigorous observational tool called Strobe to measure engagement. In the room with the shared tables, student-to-student engagement was 8% higher, and student-to-instructor engagement was 3% higher. Meanwhile, isolated self-engagement, where students just keep to themselves, dropped by 6.5%. To put that in perspective, the sheer geometry of the table quite literally forced active participation.
So what you should really take away from all this is a concept architects have known for a century. Form follows function. You can't just buy fancy, expensive wobble chairs or mobile desks and expect a miracle. If a teacher continues to just lecture at the front of the room for an hour, the fancy furniture is completely useless. The pedagogy, the actual method of teaching, must actively shift to capitalize on the flexibility of the space. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a provocative thought to apply to your own life. Take a look at the spaces where you are trying to grow, whether you're a student, a teacher, or a professional in an office. If your furniture is static, is your learning static too? We've seen today that the architecture of our attention is built by the chairs we sit in, the people we sit next to, and the physical walls around us. Change the space, and you just might change your mind. Thank you so much for joining me today, and keep exploring.